What's your name?
Anne Moore.
How old are you?
That's a cheeky question. I'm 80.
And what do you remember most about your childhood?
It was lovely, wonderful. It was in Scotland. And I had a great childhood. I was born at the beginning of the war, 1938.
Huh?
And I remember the blackout, where everybody had to cover blackout curtains so that no light ever shone out of the house, because the Germans would have got us then. But there was airports on either side of us, so we had to really keep the house dark. There was a plane crashed across from our house, a German plane, and my father, who was in the Air Force and wasn't in North Africa at the time, had to patrol it till the Air Force came and did what they had to do. What else do you want to know?
Did World War II have any close effect on your life?
Oh yeah, we had to carry a gas mask to school every day. You had a wee box that had your gas mask in it, and they had this brick building outside the school. And how you have fire drills today, we had bomb drills, and we used to have to take our gas mask and go into this little shelter and sit till whatever was happening, till our drill was over. And the baby always had a Donald Duck mask, and you were envious of the baby because you had a plain, lousy, ugly gas mask. And the children had little Donald Duck gas masks.
So did you have any family members or neighbors, family friends who fought in the war?
Oh yeah, my uncle died in the war. My Uncle Pat was in, they were all in the Air Force except one uncle. He was a desert rat in North Africa and fought against Rommel in his tanks. He was in the tank corps. Everything else was in the Air Force. And my father was in North Africa, in Alexandria and El Alamein. He went 2 days before the Battle of El Alamein. That's why my father won the war. The day of the Battle of El Alamein is when we started pushing the Germans back.
You were telling me a story the other day about when your father was in Alexandria looking for his brother.
Yes, his brother signed up, lied about his age. He wasn't quite 18, and he signed up and he was in the tank corps. And my grandmother was very worried about him because he wasn't 18 at the time. And my father was in North Africa, and he was in North Africa. And at Alexandria, Jack Benny was having a concert for the American troops. And my father knew his brother was in that audience, so he went and asked Jack Benny if he would announce was his brother over there, in there, so that he could get word to my grandmother that he was okay. But Jack Benny wouldn't do it for him, and he never liked the Americans after that. So, but he did meet up with his brother, and we had a picture of them, the two of them, before the Sphinx, sitting in front of the Sphinx in Alexandria.
And Uncle Pat went down in the North Atlantic?
Uncle Pat went down in the North Sea. His plane was coming back from America. It was towards the end of the war, and he was going to be 21 on Good Friday. And his plane went down 2 days before we was announced that he was missing. And if you go to Edinburgh Castle today, at the Air Force Memorial, his name's in the book.
What kind of a legacy would you like to leave behind?
Well, I would like my kids to know about their heritage, because I had a great life in Scotland. I also have a good life in America. But their heritage, that's the main thing to me, is where they came from, what they were about. And we fought the Germans to be free.
What do you think is the most important thing to remember about the Second World War?
Oh, well, I remember my mother had to bring me home from my grandmother's house, who lived in the same town. And I remember being put in this carriage, pram, whatever you call it, and saying to myself all the way home, I'm too big to be in this pram. But you couldn't see, everything was pitch black. So it was the only way she could get me home from my grandmother's house. And I think the rationing, candy was rationed, food was rationed. it was quite rough. My mother was lucky. She had 6 kids at the time of the war. And so she got plenty of rations because of the kids. But a lot of people struggled because you couldn't get a lot of sugar, you couldn't get butter. Everything had ration tickets. Candy had ration tickets. It was terrible. You could go into the store and buy a candy bar. And your mother never gave you the cookies, so... It was, yeah. Oh, I tell you something I do remember. It's in County where I came from, at the public school, was where all the German prisoners were in prison in the school. And in Bannockburn, it was the Italian prisoners in their school. And I, as a young girl, this is towards the end of the war, would tell on the girls if I saw the local girls going over the park with German prisoners. And they did a lot, and they used to pay you a dime, like a dime. If you didn't tell their mom, you saw them over the park with the German soldier. And as some of the Germans stayed, they never went back to Germany. They married girls in the town and stayed there. We had friends, I had a little boy called Rudy. So
they weren't treated like harshly. They weren't.
Oh, they walked about the town. They went to the movies. They weren't imprisoned if that's what they. Nothing like they did in Germany. They lived in the local school, and they did whatever they wanted to do. My uncle came home from the war at one point, and he lived in Bannockburn, and he went to the movies, and there was a big long line of all the Italian prisoners. And he'd just been fighting them all in Italy. He was in Anzio. And he came up and went to the front of the line and said, I'm not waiting in this line. I've been here fighting them for a while. So he came to the front of the line. But they were never imprisoned. They did whatever they wanted.
Now, I'll have to get a picture of it, but there's a picture on the wall over there, and you have a story about that.
The one about my mother and the 6 kids?
Yeah.
She had 6 kids, and my father was in North Africa. And we were all a year apart. But the day that we all could walk, she took us into Stirling to get her picture taken to send to my dad. And my dad's friend was a reporter for the Falkirk Herald. So when she got the picture, she mailed it to him, and his buddy got it before he did. And my father came down to the mess hall in Africa, and everybody was crowded around this wall looking at the bulletin board, and my father's edged in to see what they were all looking at. And the reporter had written a big script about fighting and everything in the war. And at the bottom it had our picture, and then underneath our picture it says, and this is what we are fighting for, the kids.
Besides technology, what do you think is the biggest difference between now and when you were growing up?
Now and when I was... we never had television. We never had a car.
Can you think of
So
it?
now we got all that. I never knew what television was. And yet it was a Scotsman that invented the television. John Logie Baird invented the TV.
Can you think of any examples that don't revolve around technology? Just the way you see people act, even?
Well, let us look at this one. One of the biggest boons in World War II, Alexander Fleming, a doctor from Scotland, invented penicillin. And penicillin was one of the greatest things that came out during the war for helping people that were injured and everything. He was a Scotsman too.
Who was the biggest influence on you as a child?
The parish priest. Your life revolved around the church. We didn't have money to go do things that you do in America. And your entertainment and everything all revolved around the parish priest. The parish priest had a play, went to the club down there, and every Tuesday and Thursday we got to go to the movies, which was just a big hall where they put up chairs, and you went in and you sat in these wooden chairs and watched a movie. So we had a big thrill going to the movies, and my mother took us all over, and we think the guy that ran the movies liked my mother so much that we got to go in before everybody else and get our seat and sit down. But it was wooden chairs in a big hall. That's how we went to the movies. They were the important things in my life in those days. The club, the church, and the movies.
I know you were a really little kid at the time, but what did you really think about the government at the time of the war? What did your parents think about the British government?
We loved Winston Churchill. We loved Harry Truman. I remember my mother talking about Harry Truman and how important he was, and she liked him. She didn't care for Eisenhower, but she liked Harry Truman.
Did they like FDR?
No, she liked Harry Truman. That was when she liked. Didn't like Ike.
What do you think were the most important values back then, and how do you think they've changed?
Most important values. Well, we grew up in a different generation from this generation. I mean, we had morals, and we had and devoted to the church. We had great faith, and we had good morals, and you just didn't do the things children do today, like living with one another. We didn't have anything like that.
What do you find most troubling about the modern generation as opposed to
the morals?
How open were people with their stories about the war after they came home?
Oh, I remember the day my father came home. There was only 2 men from our town went to the war, because I came from a mining village and all the men were down the mines. But 2 fathers, the first father, the Mullins father, was a paratrooper, and his parachute did not open, and he was brought home in a lead box because he was killed jumping from a plane. My father came home, thank God. He left 6 kids when he went. They were the only 2 men in our whole town that went to the war.
Didn't you have a neighbor or something whose son was at Dunkirk?
Bertie Boslam, yeah. Our next door neighbour had a young son that went. I was talking about the 2 fathers that went the other time. But this next door neighbour's son went. He was captured at Dunkirk. Got his leg injured at Dunkirk. Was put in a prisoner of war camp. Got gangrene in his leg and died. That was our next door neighbour, and his mother never got over it. My grandmother never got over my Uncle Pat.
When your dad came home, did he talk about the war at all, or was it
They never talk about it. They never. That's one thing I will tell you when they come home. Don't ask them about the war, because they won't talk to you about it. Hugh's Uncle Jim was in prisoner of war camp all during the war. You couldn't ask him a question about the war, he wouldn't tell you. They didn't like to talk about it.
I know you weren't alive, obviously, for World War I, but did you see a difference in the way veterans of that war were treated?
Yeah,
and veterans
my grandfather was in World War I. He was in the Black Watch, wore a kilt. It was a trench war. They went from trench to trench. My grandfather woke up one day after getting bombed, and his knee had been blown off. And he crawled through the trenches to get to a medic. And when he got there, the doctor says to him, "Oh my goodness, how in the heck did you crawl this far?" And he said, everybody else, when he woke up, everybody else running about him was dead. He says, "If you had seen what I seen when I woke up, you would have ran." And he said that when he came to France for World War I, the French were all shouting to them, "Souvenirs, souvenirs," and my grandfather thought they were saying 7 years, 7 years. He says, "No way I'm coming here for 7 years." But that was a trench war, entirely different from the Second World War.
Like, how were the veterans treated, like, when they came home?
Well, my grandfather was from a little town where I lived, and very well liked. It was such a small town, everybody knew everybody. He was very well liked, and he had 12 kids. And when he came home from the war, the local coal mine, like it was a mining town, they gave him a job. And his job, this is all he did, because he walked with a straight leg, he couldn't bend one leg. He used to open this big giant gate to let the train through. And we used to go, and he had this hut with a big blazing fire in it. And we used to go over there, and we'd all hang on the gate when he opened it. And when he swung it open, it was like a giant swing. We loved it. We'd swing back on the gate, and then we'd visit with my grandfather, and then we'd go home. So they did they took care of him when he came home. They gave him that job, and at least he was able to work. But he was in the hospital for a long time with his leg. And when we would go to church and we'd kneel down in church, his right leg always stayed straight. He could only kneel down on one leg. And that was my father. He was in the Black Watch, World War I.
Any other stories?
I can sing a lot of songs from World War I. My father taught me all the Air Force songs, and I do remember a lot about it. And I remember carrying my gas mask to school. So by the end of the war, I was in school. Well, you went to school when you were 4 back there. They took you in just to give your mother a break, I think. My mother had 6 kids at that time. Anyway, I remember taking my gas mask and going to school. And there